Hi, everybody. It is January 22nd, and we're here for our Early Literacy Educator Preparation Council meeting. It's good to see everybody. Hope that you have weathered this vicious storm safely and well. Just we're thinking about a lot of folks in our state who've been hit pretty hard. So we looks like we have critical mass in our meeting today, and so we have a lot to cover and a lot of great work to share with you all today. Just for the record, again, I'm Pooja Bhatt. I'm Governor Kotek's Education Initiative Director. And where we left off at our December meeting was that the Recommendation Refinement Subcommittee was forming to work to refine the draft recommendations that you all had in December. And so there's been a whole lot of work and just deep appreciation to Co-Chair Fritz for leading the subcommittee, and to all of you who are on the subcommittee that we'll hear from in a little bit, that spent a lot of time, particularly during the holidays, which really just demonstrates your and our commitment to really raising the bar on literacy for our kids. So today we're going to hear from the subcommittee as they present the draft recommendations to you all. We're going to do that section by section, and then we'll have an opportunity to do questions and discussion on those. And then thirdly, we'll have an opportunity to make decisions on those. And so those decisions, by the time we leave our meeting, we'll have clarity on what this council wants to put forward to educator preparation programs and to the public for public comment and EPP comment. And there'll be a month period of input for educator preparation programs and the public to weigh in on the draft recommendations that you decide to put forward following today's meeting. As a reminder, that this council is an advisory body to Governor Kotek, and our recommendations will be reviewed by the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission as well. And the Teacher Standards and Practices Commission, TSPC, is the rulemaking body to translate recommendations into rules and standards. One final and important note is that Co-Chair Gardner is experiencing a family emergency, is unable to join us today, but our thoughts are with her during this time, and we really appreciate her leadership on this council. So I'm going to be supporting Co-Chair Fritz on facilitation today instead. So with that, I will hand it over to Co-Chair Fritz to begin walking us through the draft recommendations.
Thank you, Pooja. All right. So as Pooja indicated, the subcommittee was put together in our last meeting to give us a chance to really compile all of the wonderful input from the committee that we received. And the idea was to put it into a more cohesive and standard format that would align to the Oregon Early Literacy Framework. So with that in mind, this subcommittee took on that task. I want to give special thanks to Kristen Rush. She did the initial work of kind of putting it into a standard format for us. That really saved us tons of time on the front end. So much appreciation for that work. Within the subcommittee, because we knew it was a relatively large subcommittee, I decided that it was a good idea to do a subcommittee that would do some of the initial work of putting these things together. So that then the larger subcommittee would be able to take those recommendations and really help us refine them down. So I brought together Dr. Julia Sparsa-Brown, Dr. Katie Danielson, and Dr. Anita Archer. And the four of us really dug into each of the sections and figured out ways that we could compile them. We were looking to reduce redundancies while also really honoring all of the great input that we got from the committee as a whole. And that involved us really looking at other state standards, the International Dyslexia Association Knowledge and Practice Standards, and our own existing standards, so that we could gain some insight into how that we could refine these suggestions. So once we had that draft, then we presented that to the larger subcommittee and had a really great discussion and conversation and an opportunity for even more refinement. It was really robust work that went into that subcommittee. So that's what you're going to be seeing today. We'll be presenting the sections. We'll give you sort of a rationale for our thinking around each of those sections. And then after we're done presenting, we will have time for discussion and questions. So I recommend that you take notes so that we can have that discussion at the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Anita, who will start us out by discussing the guiding principles and the structural change recommendations. Are you up for that, Anita? You might be.
Just need to unmute you, Dr. Archer.
So can you make it so that I can share my screen? Kristen might be able to, or Pooja might be able to.
Kristen or Alex, if you want to stop sharing this and allow Dr. Archer to share, that would be great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you, here we go. So first of all, Rhonda, what a great job you've done as chairperson, then chairperson of the sub-chairperson committee. Excellent. So the section I'm going to start out with was our guiding principles. And as Rhonda just conveyed to you, we collected from the three different groups that were initial subcommittees, their ideas, and then we had to put it together with the same structure. Thank you again, Kristen, and with getting it down to the essentials, because we didn't want to have the longest number of standards in the world, even though it is still pretty long. So here were our guiding principles, and we sort of altered them and strengthened them as we went. That, first of all, we want teachers prepared to teach all children to read. So what knowledge and skills do they need that are reflected in the standards? And that they should be specific, but not too prescriptive, so that they wouldn't mention particular theories. Well, they would mention overall theories, and then the teacher preparation programs would match that. And however, as you look at these standards, know that they're not the last touch. As Rhonda said, afterwards, an implementation guide for instructors in EPP programs would have guidance in how to put this into practice within classes, and information would be provided to them to support them. Now, Julie, I'm going to just hop it over to you in a moment so that you could show us an example. So hold on for that.
Sure.
And we wanted to be certain that these were the essential practices of teachers, the essential ones for practice that were research validated. And we wanted them to be teachable by instructors in higher ed programs, observable from the students' work and from their teaching, and measurable. And they also, as Rhonda pointed out, had to match a few other things, such as the Oregon Literacy Framework that you're all familiar with, the dyslexia standards that were established under law, the Oregon Standards for Students Learning, which was finalized in June 2019, and also would include existing standards that already are in the TSPC guidelines for teachers. And then you could read them right there, exactly what those areas are. So these were our guided standards to take many ideas and get them down to the essential, get them down to the research validated, get down to ones that were teachable. Okay, so before we go any further, Julie, I'm going to give the screen to you so you can pull up just one example of what our next step would be, so you can see that the specificity will be expanded on with the implementation guide.
Right, so here's an example of the standards for oral language. So there are three of them, but there's two that are delineated here, as you can see. And for example, so this is the implementation guide For this standard, procedures for establishing classroom settings where oral language skills of listening and speaking are emphasized and students to student interaction is promoted. Here are the implementation suggestions. Now, Dr. Archer used as a resource this great book on literacy for multilingual learners by Elsa Cardenas Hagen, who is a speech and language specialist in Texas, and pulled out here some activities that would then address the standards. So like establishing classroom routines in the classroom so that they can understand what's expected with them, use gestures and visual support. So you can see all of the best practices in the instruction of multilingual learners that are specific to addressing these standards. So we plan on having an implementation guide then for every standard. Is there anything?
Thank you very much.
Great.
And you're going to give it back to me.
Yeah.
And so the only reason I'm sharing this screen is God is a longtime educator. I love highlighting. So I hope that doesn't drive you nuts. The next part was structural change recommendations. And so if you look at the draft here, it is referred to as the literacy standards. And it was meant to have standards that were already in place in reading instruction, as well as the dyslexia standards under one cohesive literacy standards label. And it would also utilize existing standards because many of the things suggested were about culturally relevant practices, social emotional, but we learned that there are already standards. In fact, I will tell you the subcommittee and the subcommittee have read every standard for Oregon education. And so we were able to locate that these have already been addressed and don't need to be duplicated. But then we created new standards that were consistent with Oregon's early literacy framework, the models of reading acquisition embedded in that framework. So our whole goal here was to take all the suggestions, get them down to essential, research-validated, teachable standards that would put them under one label. So then this is the draft of the literacy program standards. And the purpose is, first of all, to respond to two laws. And we got to be familiar with the laws for literacy education. And this one, if you follow my cursor, asked that higher education program, educator preparation programs would teach teachers so that their students that they taught would meet the third grade reading standards and be proficient readers by the end of third grade. That is the overall goal and also the goal of our governor. And then we have the dyslexia law. Now, the dyslexia law called for screening of children for dyslexia, instruction for them, utilizing the standards outlined in an international organization on dyslexia, IDA, International Dyslexia Association. So you'll notice that since those were already in law, that we followed those in writing the new standards for the state of Oregon's educational programs. Well, now, the standards are for teachers, education, but also for administrators. Now, while we want the teachers to have the knowledge and the skills, we also want them to demonstrate with students that they could teach these skills. Administrators, we want them to have the knowledge so that they can recognize, oh, there's phonemic awareness. Oh, I see that the teacher is teaching a comprehension strategy, and also to be able to give feedback to the teachers to improve the quality of instruction in their individual classrooms. So we have same knowledge, but different ways that they would address it. Okay, and who is going to be required to have these skills? Well, if you're going to be a elementary multi-subject teacher, you will know how to teach reading and writing. If you're a teacher interventionist, you are going to be very knowledgeable in this area. If you're a special educator, you will be knowledge in these standards. If you could, Rhonda, give me an update on this. We felt that it was important if you were going to get an endorsement for English speakers of other languages, that you would also be up to date of what is required in teaching reading and writing. Where are we on that, Rhonda?
That's something that we need to discuss today, because as a council, we need to decide if we want to add that area, because it wasn't one of our initial charges. So that will be part of the conversation later. So keep that on your radar. We need to be talking about that today too.
God, we have big radar, all kinds of things to discuss. Thanks, Rhonda. That it would be with administrators as we talked about it. Well, I'm going to send this back to Rhonda to talk about the dispositions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. So in terms of the dispositions, this is one that we really had some excellent recommendations for. So we took on that task of looking at those other standards that Anita mentioned to see if there were existing standards that covered many of those recommendations that the larger council made. And we did find that those were there in those different standards for culturally sustaining practices to promote equity, competent and ethical performance of Oregon and educators, and social and emotional development to provide equity, or to promote equity, sorry. All of those standards covered a lot of what was recommended by the larger council. So we were able to drop the number for dispositions and wanted to note that those are covered in other areas. But we did have some standards that you recommended that were specific to literacy. So we did include those as separate dispositions, and you'll find those in the document. They cover acknowledging that reading and writing is not natural and must be taught, that all students can develop literacy skills. Practices must be used on evidence-based practices must be used, and we want those practices to impact all learners. We also thought that dispositions related to literacy should specifically address the benefits of being bilingual and biliterate. So you'll notice that one of the standards is related to that. So just wanted to make sure that you were aware that we really did cross-reference those other standards to make sure that your ideas were included in there. And if you had a chance to look through those, I'm confident that you would have found that information there. But I am going to pass it back to Anita so she can go through. We're going to dive into the standards now, and she's going to start with standard 1, which is the knowledge of literacy acquisition and instruction.
Thank you. And so standard 1, you have knowledge of literacy acquisition and instruction. So I'm teaching a class, I am in higher education, and I'm going to be certain that the students are aware of the major models of reading found in Oregon Literacy Framework that would talk about what are critical skills and knowledge that students have, children have, in order to learn to read. And I would be very aware of the phases of reading development. For example, that might include in the implementation guide, the research done by Lene Airy to indicate the process of reading development. And I am going to understand the structure of English, phonology, the sounds, or graphic, so the graphemes within the words, morphology, the meaningful parts, and how these are related. For example, decoding is related directly to encoding, spelling, and that I would understand the components of reading that account for achievement over time. That in the early grades, decoding is highly important. It continues to be, but then vocabulary and background knowledge take even more importance. And that there are many factors that affect reading and writing development, and I should understand those and understand and recognize proficient versus students who are not yet proficient in reading. So these are very basic literacy acquisition and instruction. And now, since my expertise is in instruction, I got to do this one, but here's how important the implementation guide would be. So for example, under instruction, it's not just important that you know about phonemic awareness and letter sound associations and decoding of words and morphology, but that you can teach. And so we sort of summarized it here. The general principles and practice of structured language and literacy teaching, including explicit, systematic, cumulative, and teacher-directed instruction. Well, there's going to be a long implementation guide about what that would mean in terms of what research says you should know. That's the standards are broad, the implementation would be detailed. And routines make a big difference in teaching literacy skills. The teachers, as they go out, they're going to be implementing curriculum materials, but they should be able to analyze them in relationship to what they know about the science of reading and what they know about the science of instruction. So you just notice how we had to simplify so that we had a teachable number of standards. Now I'm going to, this is again the administrative candidates who are going to become principals or central office people. They need the knowledge, they need the understanding so they can identify effective literacy instruction and provide feedback. But they also should be able to evaluate instructional materials to see if it meets those conditions for use within their school, within their district. Well, we're going to send it back now to Rhonda. Notice, Rhonda, do you just want me to leave my screen up and make it go forward?
I will let Kristen go ahead and put her screen up.
Okay, I'm going to stop my share and Kristen, put yours up.
Thank you, Kristen. And thank you, Anita. All right, I was in charge of Standard 2, the literacy foundational skills. And as we started working on these, we decided we did need to refine some of the standards that were initially presented at our last meeting. Partly because other groups had brought in some ideas that we really needed to consider under this foundational literacy skills section. For instance, we really felt that those oral language standards that were so carefully brought to our attention were included in that literacy foundational skills section because it's really an extremely important part of early literacy development. So we thought it needed a premier spot in that area. Most of the remaining standards were patterned off of the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards because they are already in rule. So related to those dyslexia standards. So we thought that was a good starting place. And we had presented most of those at our last meeting. But as with the previous sections, in terms of the administrators, we believe that they needed to be able to identify these kinds of elements in practice so that they could provide feedback to teachers for them to improve their practice. So not a lot changed in this section, but we did add in a few things that the knowledge and practice standards hadn't included, but that you all recommended and we thought were super important. And so that's kind of the big idea of the literacy foundational skills. So I will let Katie take over standard 3.
Yes, thank you. So I was looking at standard 3, it's the higher level literacy skills, and this is really the vocabulary, background knowledge, comprehension, and writing. And a change that we'll see is the vocabulary and comprehension remain pretty much the same, but given that the other groups had worked on and feedback, we felt it was important to have a section on background knowledge, given its prominence in the research and its connection to vocabulary and comprehension. And in writing those background knowledge standards to ensure that we are really acknowledging the wealth of knowledge that children are coming into classes with, as well as building that knowledge in the classroom space. And then you'll notice the change in the writing standards. In our last meeting, we talked a lot about the importance of having the handwriting in there. And so we've been made sure that we included that feedback we received to have in this section. And then again, the administrative standards align with the others in terms of their role in that.
Thank you. I guess that bounces back to me then, assessment and database decision-making. With this section, we really wanted to ensure that teacher and administrator candidates understood the importance of using assessment data to drive instructional choices. And that was very clear message from the group that worked on instruction and assessment in the first iteration of these standards. We felt that they needed to understand the purposes of the different types of assessment, be able to interpret assessment data to identify students who might need additional supports, and also be able to communicate test data with students, families, other teachers. We also thought that candidates should have an understanding of how a system of multi-tiered supports can support all learners in gaining literacy. So we actually called that out in one of the standards under B, under database decision-making. I also wanted to, I think up above in the section on assessment, we also included a standard around formative assessment. So teachers being able to use ongoing assessments to make decisions in their classrooms. And that was part of some of the recommendations that we got too. So I think that's the big ideas for those sections. I'll turn it over to Julie and she can take over standard 5.
Great. Thank you. So standard 5, supporting multilingual learners and students with reading difficulties, reading disabilities, and dyslexia. Again, you'll see these align the dyslexia standards with IDEA standards. But in terms of the multilingual learner section, it's critical that all teachers, not just some that are trained with an ESOL endorsement, really understand, the impact of language and literacy development with multilingual learners and the stages of second language acquisition, as they will be informed by the ELPA, which is our state's English language proficiency assessment, the ELPA 21, to understand. So that's part of the assessment up above, understand what all scores mean, and then how to interpret those so that that guides instruction, because it's critical, again, that all teachers understand where a child falls on that progression of learning English is going to impact their guide their instruction and the supports that they need in an English setting. And to teach them the key components of language and literacy that align with literacy instruction. I'll use evidence-based research. Of course, there's a large body of research on best practices that we need for all teacher candidates to have access to, know where to find that data, as well as leveraging technology. And certainly AI will play a role here now in the instruction of all students. Students with reading difficulties, for all teachers to understand how reading disabilities vary in presentation and degree. So not one child is really going to present the same way. The aims of literacy instruction that apply to all children. So again, brushing up the toolkit of how to provide accommodations, supports, and the use of technology for all students. Interpret the screening data, know the evidence-based instruction for teaching students, particularly with dyslexia, and remembering that there will be candidates with reading endorsements that will really dig down more deeply into the instruction and assessment of students with dyslexia, but that all candidates need to have some basic knowledge because that instructional piece will fall to them to teach all students.
And then the last section are the standards connected to field experience. And so all of the groups, when we had first started looking at the standards, we agreed that candidates would be able to demonstrate knowledge, understanding, and application of this work. And as we went through the standards, we kind of were realizing that that application portion was really missing, and that we really wanted to make sure we clearly had a link between these standards for the courses and then also what candidates are doing in their field experience, because that's such a critical component of their learning to teach literacy. And so we've added in standards around the opportunities that they would have in their program of study, right? We all know they have those field experience hours that they're doing already, but to really be a little bit more directive to ensure that it connects to the coursework that they will be having at their institution when these changes go into effect. And so it's really kind of making sure that we include all of the components that are to be impacted and are really clear in helping EPPs see the connection and provide some guidance. And so we added in that standard 6. Thank you.
You, Katie. Pooja, are you taking over from here? For a little bit?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much to the subcommittee. And apparently there was a smaller group that also helped to take on work. So just deep appreciation for all of you for the thorough and robust work to go through all the different standards and guidance and the executive order and all that and mapping that into the recommendations. So thank you, tremendous work. For discussion, because that was a lot of really rich work, what we want to do is take it chunk by chunk to allow space for questions. So right now we're looking for clarifying questions about what the subcommittee just presented to you and drafted. So clarifying questions, and then identify any flags that you're wondering about or that you're curious about. And the intent of this part of the discussion, as always, is to listen for constructive and provide constructive feedback that can allow us to further improve that. So constructive feedback is helpful. And then we've got some of our team members who are taking notes from this discussion as well. So right now, we're not going to make decisions on each of these. We're just creating space for questions. So with that, why don't we start with the structural recommendations and the guiding principles that Dr. Archer walked us through at the beginning? Are there any clarifying questions related to that section? And feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Yes, Rep. Wright.
Could we bring that up so we can look at it? May we?
Yes, Dr. Archer, would you mind sharing that marked up version if you have it handy? If not, we can do so.
Thank you.
So this is, we can't hear you yet, Dr. Archer, just related to the guiding principles section and the structural change sections.
Thanks, dear. I'm just finding it and I will throw it up.
Thank you.
Thanks for being waiting just a moment. There we go. And I knew, Boomer, you probably didn't need the highlighted one, but there it is. Okay.
Thank you.
And I will put up as much of that as possible if there.
Thank you. Yep. So anything that you all have questions or curiosities about related to this guiding principle and the structural change parts and the dispositions as well. Let us know if you'd like Dr. Archer to scroll. So what I understand, Dr. Archer, is what you added in red is the parts in red are new from the December meeting, right?
Actually, sweetheart, they're in red so that I could have my brain go to right to them. No, they were the only things we really, they were exactly the same
Okay,
by then, but we did emphasize that they were teachable, observable, and measurable.
okay. Thank you.
And the next segment, Representative Wright, was on combining them. And the next section was on how they had to reflect the two major laws in terms of what we teach students and the dyslexia law.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's just pause there. I saw Heidi, your hand up. So go ahead and unmute if you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a clarifying question. So I think I understand. So the recommendation is dyslexia standards on their own would kind of go away, dissipate, and instead they'd be combined with reading instruction to create a new literacy standards that we, on the next section, are recommending include the scope of elementary multiple subjects, reading interventions, SPED, ESOL, and administrator licensure.
So Heidi, we wanted, because the IDA standards in the rule that already come through with the dyslexia law, that they were useful for children with dyslexia, but also all children. But we did restate them at the end in the part that Julie went through to be certain that they were held in integrity for those people serving. So you actually get them sprinkled throughout and then restated so that they are not lost for the population very concerned with students with dyslexia.
Did that answer your question, Heidi? Okay, great. Representative Wright?
Well, first of all, thank you for all the hard work. This is amazing. Under scope, and it says reading intervention. May I assume that that also deals with Title I teachers and their experience?
That would be anyone who was getting a reading intervention endorsement. And typically Title I teachers have to have that.
Okay.
So yes.
Oh, I learned something. Thank you.
Any additional questions again on this section of that we're on purpose and structure?
Fuja, just a question. Are we going to come back to the question of number of D?
Co-Chair Fritz, would you like to address that now, or do you want to address that later?
Yeah, we could definitely address it now. And it looks like Melissa Goff, did you have a question about that?
Yep, same question.
Yeah, I would like to bring it up now so that we can decide if that is a route that the council wants to go. And I'll tell you a little bit of background about why we put it in there. We actually, the subcommittee went back and forth on this, but found out from a colleague, and then Kristen confirmed that a teacher could go and get just an English for speakers of other languages initial license. And in that case, we wouldn't want them to not have that background information on teaching literacy. So we felt it was important for those teachers to also have this literacy information. So I would love to hear thoughts and ideas on that from other council members. And then I don't know how that works, Pooja, in terms of adding it in.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and just take questions and comments about that particular one. And Melissa, if you want to just introduce yourself to the group and just kind of share your perspective, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Pooja. My name is Melissa Goff, and I'm the Interim Executive Director for Teacher Standards and Practices. And I'm happy to see you all. I know many of you. It's great to see you and opportunity. Regarding this particular item, my question was simply, if we don't put that in, I am concerned that that group would get missed in having this expertise, and we know that it's so important, particularly because oftentimes even those who have the license for ESOL are also developing students' primary language, the language in their home. And if they're developing a home language, they really, really need to understand how literacy, how students gain language, how they acquire language, how language grows. So I thought that, so in my mind, that's an important.
Thank you.
Other perspectives specifically around what you want to do here? Go ahead, Rep. Wright.
Well, thank you. I'm just trying to understand, since I've never taught this, the perspective of, say, walking into a school district like Woodburn, who has 23 different languages being taught there. How do you prepare for that in this English as speakers of another language? I guess I'm trying to understand how we'd even. Are there certain sets of skills specifically for this in relationship to the different languages? I just want to understand how that can work. Thank you.
Good question. I don't know, Dr. Archer, if you want to respond to that, and if others have perspectives as well, we'll go to you. Go ahead.
So when you visited school where you were like a principal and you have students varied languages and someone is working with them, they would have to be able to find information about, for example, the phonemes within that language, which would be the same or would be different, but they would also be teaching English. They're the ones who are going to, maybe they have a fifth grader who comes and they have to gain the language skills. And so they're going to be teaching reading and writing along with oral language. So this body of knowledge would be essential for them, and the ability to, because we don't expect any teacher education prep program to cover all the many languages. But they would have the ability to find the resources they needed in terms of the syntax differences, the sounds differences, but mostly they're going to have to teach English. So to have this body of knowledge not be taught would be very significant in terms of helping the 23% of our population that are English language learners. I think that's the right percentage.
Thank you. Any other perspectives on that particular question? What, Jennifer, did you have one on this point or a different one?
No, on this point,
Great.
I just think the school perspective right now, when I think about the implementation in my school, my ELD teacher works just right in collaboration with the academic coach. And so sometimes they're, really looking like through an ALPA test to see, are we really still working on those early oral language skills? Are we ready to move into literacy? And so I think that I would agree that it really should be added, because there's just so much overlap with the language development and then into the literacy development. And so they're constantly working in the kids in and out with groups and support. So I think that really would increase their capacity to deliver really high leverage instruction.
Great, thank you. Shahnaz?
Yeah, I just want to briefly add that I agree that it's really critical for all the reasons that have already been said. And also in recognition that literacy, reading and writing are two of the 4 domains of language, but all 4 domains of language are interdependent and interrelated. And our ELs are disproportionately more apt to not be proficient readers at this point with our current system and standards. So I think that it's really critical that our teachers who are specializing in working with our multilingual students, our speakers of other languages, have all of this knowledge and skills in literacy specifically.
Thank you. Dr. Esparza Brown, were you going to say something on this as well? Anything you want to add?
I think nothing to add. I mean, we have embedded in the standards what Dr. Archer was explaining about, ensuring that all teacher candidates have the knowledge of where to go for resources to understand the languages that students are bringing in, even when they're teaching in English.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Interim Director Spencer.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to start by saying thank you for this. And I really appreciate Dr. Archer having the red highlights. It does help. And I'm not going to say that it has any indication of my current eyesight situation. I think my prescription just keeps getting stronger. As I was reading through this, I'm always thinking about what is and who is the person who's giving that coaching and support to the teacher as it's boots on the ground and when it's actually happening in real time. And I'm wondering about the last paragraph under purpose. It talks about the intent of these standards, and if we move to the last line, it talks about providing feedback to improve instruction. And I was just only thinking that prior to this, in this document, it was really specific around literacy instruction, best practices around literacy instruction. I'm just wondering if it could be beefed up a little bit to provide more than just feedback, but it may be that they're the only person who's available to provide coaching to that teacher as well. And so I'm just wondering if that line could be strengthened just a little bit with more of an emphasis around it's a shared responsibility, that you're not just giving feedback, but you're literally also following up on that feedback at some point, I would hope and think would happen. So maybe it's not at this point that it's all that important, but I just want to balance it a little bit that if teachers are new to the profession or are struggling, they will need someone to definitely provide feedback and follow up to them to help set them on a new trajectory with students. And again, deep appreciation. This is a big lift.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rep. Wright.
I thought those were excellent points, and I do agree with the coaching. I think as we implement this further down the road, the Oregon Department of Education is going to be highly valuable in making sure that coaching and materials are available to those people in the various languages. Thank you.
All right, so we heard a suggestion. I'm going to ask Kristen, put you on the spot to share what you captured in notes from suggestions on this point, particularly from Interim Director Spencer's comments.
Yeah, so I just have a note here, wondering if we can be more explicit about the administrator role, and particularly around the responsibility for both the administrator and the teacher to support the literacy development of the children. And so to move straight from a kind of a feedback model to a coaching model, which I think that Anita has highlighted here. And so there may be some language that we can put in there around the responsibility of that administrator to support this as a whole. Do you want me to go into the notes for the other sections too, or just the purpose?
Just the purpose for now. Any final comments on the purpose?
I just want to say, I do think that makes a lot of sense to beef that up and add that coaching piece, because when we think about some of our smaller rural districts that don't have coaches, those administrators are going to need to fill that role.
And then on scope, I'm hearing the English for speakers of other languages, that we keep that in here. Is that right? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Can we move to the next section, or is there anybody who's going to stop me on the guiding principles, purpose, dispositions. Okay, let's move to, if you want to stop screen sharing, Dr. Archer, I think one of our Kristen or Alex is going to screen share standard 1. Standard 1, are there any questions or discussion? There we go. Thank you. Go ahead, Representative Wright.
Just a bias. Every time I see understand in standards, I always think it should be followed by and demonstrate. Understanding is one thing, but being able to demonstrate what you understand is, I think, what we're looking for. But just as a bias of mine. Thank you.
So, Representative Wright, if you look under instruction, which should have been under literacy 2, for each of these standards, teacher candidates will demonstrate knowledge, understanding, and application of effective literacy instruction for all students, which we put in there after each one, so we wouldn't have to repeat it for every single standard. Would that do it?
You bet. Thank you.
All right. We'll be certain that we include that in all those places.
Thank you for your thoughtfulness, anticipating the questions and intentionally getting them in. Appreciate that, Dr. Archer and the committee. Any other comments, questions, curiosities related to standard 1? If you want to keep scrolling, Alex. Okay, that is the end, just after admin. Okay, before we go to 2, let's just pause to make sure no other comments. Okay.
I wonder if we do need to make note in each of these administrator candidate standards to reflect what Interim Director Spencer said about coaching.
I agree.
So what would that look like?
Well, I think maybe what was up above, like provide appropriate feedback and coaching.
Okay.
For the I.
Right. Okay. Great. We got that, Kristen, in the notes.
Yes.
Great. All right. Let's move along to standard 2. Any questions and discussion about this one? I was going to say there's a lot here, but there's a lot to everything, which is really good. So that's great. Questions?
Since these are foundation skills and critical, could we stop and just respond to oral language, then to phonological awareness and so forth, to be certain that everybody agrees that these are critical?
Great point.
Yeah, and we also, we're understand and of the dual language programs that we have. We're very proud of what we have in Oregon, but that there are some commonalities across oral language development, and to emphasize, so these are not just for the instruction of English reading. So acknowledging that.
I think it's, in like the oral language, the second one, that is an indicator as well on our evaluation rubric that just comes under student engagement. So it really is then more explicitly taught in the EPP program, but then it is a look for sort of on our evaluation criteria. So I think it's nice because I don't know now in the, like, what is set up for success, what like talk moves are used and different strategies to get kids talking across all domains, math, reading, all of the different domains. So I think this is great because it's also then a criteria for evaluation.
Right.
All right. What about phonological awareness? Any comments and questions, discussion on that item? Okay. Decoding and word recognition? And fluency? And then admin candidate standards. Okay,
Let's add in coaching to the end of that one also.
Right.
thank you. Capture that in the notes. All right, let's move to standard 3 and we'll go to vocabulary. And background knowledge. Let's move to comprehension. Writing. And then the administrator candidate standards. I'm guessing you want to just add that as a through line through all the admin. Okay, great. So we'll add coaching to all of that. Okay, no questions, comments on standard 4? Then we'll move to, I'm sorry, standard 3. Now we'll move to standard 4, assessment and data-based decision-making. So anything that we want to share on assessment? And data-based decision-making to inform instructional intensity.
So I was very pleased to see the acknowledgement of multi-tiered system of supports, since Oregon has one of the finest multi-MTSS programs in the United States. And that really does, if that system is in place and people should be knowledgeable about it before they go to schools, it makes a difference in our serving students who are struggling readers. So I really applaud that being there and defined to be certain that it's concluded in teacher ed programs.
Yeah, and I don't think that it is generally, because when I check in across all of our programs, this does not seem to be really emphasized. So it is important that it's here.
All right, any other comments on this standard? Okay, noting on the admin candidate, we'll just continue to do what we've talked about, and then we'll move to standard 5. Multilingual learners. I had a question that I was curious about is in one of my read-throughs, I was curious about in some places bilingual is used, in other places multilingual, and I'm just curious if the committee can kind of just share a little bit about the thinking and why it's helpful to use one word over another.
Where are you?
So it's more really maybe in other places. So this is all about multilingual learners, but I think other places there was bilingual. Is there a distinction between those two that are helpful? If you do a Control F, it appears the word bilingual is used twice, once under dispositions that we already talked about, but it's just reminded of me. Actually, they're both in dispositions. So is it helpful to align multilingual to be the word that's used throughout standards?
Well,
Right.
I think that's a decision we have to make because now I'm seeing that we talk about English learners here under the section of multilingual learners. So just the trends in the field are the use of multilingual learner instead of EL or emergent bilingual. So
Okay.
I think it's a choice. We'll have to decide.
Well, I'm curious about, yeah, maybe this is a good time. What do you think, Co-Chair Fritz? What is your?
Well, I think we need to be consistent throughout, and I lean toward multilingual as the term. I see Shanaz nodding her head. But I would love, that's really not my area of expertise, so I would love to hear others' thoughts around that. But I would like to see us be consistent with whichever we choose.
Can I just say I published a brief just that came out last week on the National Center for Intensive Intervention website, and we are using multilingual learner.
Right. So I'm sitting here in the state that has the most multilingual learners in the United States, in Hawaii. And so they just changed everything to multi. And so it seems to me that that would be a good way to go. It's the future. We're being the future.
Yep.
So let's join them.
I appreciate you guys catching that. I with the different ways that we're talking about students, we do have English language, we do have, and then I love that that we're working on literacy, but we're also working on literacy for our native language, where native languages, where we're trying to revitalize and put this back, give them their languages back. And so I really appreciate the catch on this, and I hope that we do lean towards something more like multilingual.
Thank you, Val. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you. And to Val's point, I'm unclear as to why English learners is called out under the multilingual learners component, and I'm curious about that choice, and am wondering if we wanted to emphasize English because the assumption is multilingual learners are coming from a different home language. And if so, could we not say understand language and literacy development of language learners, including English in English? Because I do understand perhaps that there are aspects of English acquisition that may be unique as compared to, for example, to a native language like Val is teaching. However, I do think the way it's phrased for me unintentionally exclude multilingualism.
Well, for me, I think multilingual learner fits there because whatever languages the children are bringing in, we really need to understand the impact of literacy development in any of their instructional languages. Does that answer your question? Not really.
Yes, so Julie, I'm not about that header, but I'm talking about where English is called out under multilingual learners. So like in A sub 1, understand development of English learners. Could we read that as multilingual learners? Okay, that's what I would suggest.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we need to go through. That's so helpful. In the all of the things we were attending to, we were, we tried to be very thoughtful, but to go through and to align that language for multilingual, where there's either English learner or bilingual, to go through and make those changes, and so we're consistent with multilingual.
Okay, so I'm hearing that the intent in this whole document is to be consistent around using the the word multilingual. So we'll change any instances where it says by after the meeting, just so that that's part of the decision making. Okay. And then for that particular point that Melissa was naming is under multilingual sub 1, understand language and literacy development of multilingual learners. Is that what the suggestion is? And 3 and 4. Okay. Okay. I see your point. Yeah. Thank you. All right. That's the intent of the committee anyway. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Good discussion. And multilingual is also the phrase used in the early literacy framework too. So I think we have a lot of alignment. Perfect. Let's move to students with reading difficulties, reading disabilities and dyslexia. Any comments, questions there?
This is just a reminder that the dyslexia standards that are already in place are repeated here with the IDA. This is just to honor the fact that that is already of rule. So there is some repetition, but we thought it was critical repetition. So they did not feel that they were set aside, that was here, because we have many organizations and parents and children who would be checking out that part.
Thank you. All right, do we need any more time on this section, or can we move to the last standard, which is field experiences? Okay, we'll move to standard 6.
It is 2 parts, and we left out an A here with A candidates.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Small
we'll capture that on our notes too.
Great.
Exactly.
You can only catch so much when you're working over the holidays, looking at every standard that Oregon has. So we can do these tweaks for sure. All right. Any overall comments, questions that you didn't have a chance to share yet? Go ahead, Melissa.
So sorry, I was a little stuck on standard 6 with field experiences. So the language currently is candidates are given opportunities throughout the program of study. What if the candidates, though, choose not to participate in field study experiences? That is still allowable by this phrasing, and I'm wondering if that's only allowable or if the expectation is that all students will participate in field experience.
I think we didn't want it optional.
Well, I think I think it's our understanding that because, for program approval, there is a certain number of credit hours that are required. Like, so for the reading intervention, right, it's 60 hours of field experience. And that this is saying that part of that would be that they are just specifically looking at literacy and noting that it's outside of the student teaching requirement. So we kind of felt that like there was the assumption that there already will be field experience because that's a part of programs, but really giving direction that literacy will. But I do think the opportunities, that word is could leave it up. So that's something that we should
Or is it opportunities through during their field work? So the field work's the given, but during that field work, they have the opportunities for these types of settings.
Hmm.
I think that's right.
Well, and one thing with the first one, we also wanted to call out that they should be practicing these things with peers before they ever get into the field experience. So I think what I hear you saying, Melissa, is making that first statement more explicit that they'll be required. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, sorry, I just heard that my voice is really soft, so new computer. So the first part I would say is candidates programs of study for candidates shall include, and then sub 1, practice of instruction prior, right? I would just, if you want it mandatory, you're gonna need to say shall include. If you say, given opportunity, it's not mandatory for OAS.
Get that language, Kristen, because that was really good.
Yes, programs of study for candidates shall include colon, and then you can, I think you could use the rest of the language the same.
Did you capture that, Kristen?
I got it.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. Is there any other feedback that we want to share just in terms of kind of as you've had time to process it, either overall kind of questions or comments? I know it's a lot, so don't want to move too fast, but also we can move to a break if you want to, and then we'll come back and do some decision making. Okay. Well, why don't we stop screen sharing here for a moment? And what we're going to do is we'll take a 5-minute break and off camera and cameras and mics off. We'll come back at, let's talk about 2:17-ish. And then we'll come back and make decisions about each of these sections that we want to move forward with. And at that time, Kristen, maybe we can screen share some of the notes to make sure that we've captured them section by section. So, okay, we'll see you in about 5 minutes. All right, I think we can wander back to the screen. I'll give it a minute till we see a little bit more faces. Okay. And I'm noting that we have Aaron, one of our staff from HEC, have noted a tiny note. Aaron, I'd like for you to unmute and put your feedback into the room, please, verbally.
Yes, thank you, Pooja. I noticed in part 6 that we just wrapped up, there's a reference to Oregon Common Core state standards. And I think that's a little bit of an outdated reference. I'm assuming we mean the Oregon standards for English, language arts, and literacy, the way it's referenced on page 1. Probably good to be consistent there, but it's very small change.
Oh, it's not too small.
Thank you.
Another good job.
Are there any concerns or discussion need on that one? No? Okay. All right, and then Kristen, if you can you capture that in the notes on that part too? Great. Well, Co-Chair Fritz, do you want to kick off the kind of decision-making mode here?
Sure. Okay, so we're going to utilize the 5 to 5 idea for each of the sections. So if it's something that you think you're comfortable with, fully on board, you would give it a 5. And if you have reservations, you would go lower, of course. And if you have a 1 or a 2, then that would be something that we would need to talk more about before we move forward. So we're going to, oh, thank you for putting that up. That really helps. So to begin with, we're going to look at the first sections under guiding principles, structural change recommendations, purpose, scope, and dispositions as one whole. So if there's any part of that you want to talk more about, feel free, but we'd like to go ahead and do a consensus on those 5, or see if we can come to a consensus, I should say, on those 5. So with that in mind, thinking about that one section of the first guiding principles, structural change recommendations, purpose, scope, and dispositions, go ahead and hold up your hands.
Rhonda, can you put them on the screen? Because we don't all remember the numbers exactly. So we
Okay.
know what we're talking about.
Sure, Kristen, can you
Just
do that?
Do you mean the numbers, Dr.
no,
Archer?
just the document again, scroll through the part that we're voting on so that we know.
Okay, yep, got it.
Thank
Got
you.
it. Thank you.
And then we also have, so if we could screen share that, Kristen, and then we also have a poll that will pop up and hopefully be specific about what we're asking you to vote on. So let's see if we can try that out.
All right.
We'll get this technology to work for us today.
I didn't know we had a poll. That's very fancy.
Yeah, let me launch it. I think, does that come up on your screen? So you
Yeah.
should be able to see a poll alongside the screen share of the thing that we're asking you to vote on. So we're asking only official council members, you know who you are voting, not staff.
Pooja, good job.
Oh, it's the teamwork behind the scenes over here. We have a lot of really amazing folks. So thank you.
Submit. Okay.
I'm just giving it a moment to make sure folks have time to do this. Okay, are we waiting for any more folks to vote that are council members? Please unmute if so. I'll give it a moment. No? Okay, I'm going to end the poll and we're going to screen share. End poll, share results. Okay, so hopefully you should see on your screen that we've got most of us are 5, 4, and 3. So I'm curious about the minor issues that can be resolved later, just to make sure that we have a shared understanding of what's coming up for folks. So the 3 again means we move forward, but just in the interest of transparency, whoever that person was, if you just want to share on that, that would help. And it would rely on the person remembering their vote. And maybe that's not the case. That's fine. Okay, so no issues that folks want to put out there into the space on that. Okay, so we'll move forward on that section. So I'm going to stop sharing. And then we're moving to standard 1, which is knowledge of literacy, acquisition, and instruction. So let's screen share that. So standard 1, that's both literacy and acquisition, instruction, and administrator candidate standards. So that's what we're asking you to vote on now. And let me relaunch another poll. Let's see if I can do this. Look at that. Sorry, ignore the first number in before standard 1 and just pay attention to standard 1. Okay, and are we waiting for any more folks to vote? Okay, I'm going to end a poll, share results. And we've got everybody is a 5 and a 4. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to go to, well, Co-Chair Fritz, do you want to lead this next part?
Sure. We're going to go on to standard 2. So this one is the foundational skills, which is pretty long one. Includes oral language, phonological awareness, word recognition and decoding, and fluency.
Okay. Any last folks that need to vote? Let me end the poll, share results. So we have everybody who is a 5 and 4 again. Okay. Let's go to the next standard is 3, higher level literacy skills. Launch that poll. I think we're waiting on one more person, 1 or 2 more. There we go. Okay. Let me end the poll, share results. And we have some consistent themes here of everybody being a 5 and 4. I'll stop sharing. And Co-Chair Fritz, if you want to take this next one.
Yes. So we are down to standard 4, assessment and database decision making. Go ahead and vote on that.
Anyone left here? Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. Share results. We got a couple threes here. Anybody want to share anything you want to talk about? Go ahead, Shauna's.
Yeah, this was a conversation that came up after we had done our revisions. So we didn't have a chance to discuss it as a whole subcommittee, but I had an email conversation with Rhonda, and we particularly wanted input from Dr. Julia Spadsa Brown and the group, because I was wondering about adding into either now I can't remember if it's part A or part B, but in assessment, a specific standard that would read something like how to use an assets-based analysis of multilingual students when using literacy data from multiple languages to form instruction.
Dr. Sparza Brown, I think you're on mute.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to hear other thoughts. So let's open it up and let me hear.
Would it be helpful if I type it in the chat?
I think the idea is just the asset-based, right, in data interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Archer, you're on mute too.
So can you explain this, because the term asset-based might not be known by all?
Yes, so this would be particularly for students who are in dual immersion programs, but any student who is a multilingual learner and receiving language and literacy support in both of their languages. So an assets-based assessment analysis or data analysis that we do on multilingual learners is we look at what they know in both or all of their languages. And for example, a student may not have basic decoding skills in English, but it turns out that they do have decoding skills in, let's say, Spanish. And so instead of just saying, well, this kid has no decoding skills whatsoever, which isn't true, there's that looking at what assets they do have, that they may not have their decoding skills yet in English, but they do have them in Spanish, and that really informs instruction because that student knows in their brain how to decode and needs a different type of instruction to bridge the languages.
As you just described the brief that I was telling you about earlier, that's exactly the analysis that we're walking through. But I guess we consider, or we use the terms kind of a holistic, looking at a holistic profile. So I don't know if using some kind of that language, that still doesn't get at kind of looking across the languages. So maybe we can wordsmith and come up with something that would work for, again, you want a whole profile, taking into a holistic approach across their languages, maybe, and cultural. It boils down to their linguistic assets and their kind of their acculturation and the interpretation of data. That's where the biases come in.
But this one is, I like the term holistic approach, but just because the reader has to know whoever's doing what it means. But we do have very good research to show that your competence in decoding or in vocabulary in a first language is going to predict your acquisition of the second language. So that does make sense to include it, just so we have language that would have universal understanding.
Yes, I agree.
Do we feel like that is appropriate in the assessment section, or is that more appropriate in the supporting multilingual learners section?
I would go with in the multilingual section, that it'd be very critical there.
So for me, we really look at it in terms of MTSS.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if maybe that would be a place too, because it's database decision making that encompasses assessment and instruction.
So as I remember, this is listed under MTSS, and so putting it with the English language learners under MTSS would make sense to me.
Mhm.
You know
So
what? I think I completely jumped the gun and
you
made
meant
the
there
comment one
too,
standard too soon.
right? Because I thought that's where you meant to have that.
Where?
So I think your idea of writing it out and use a holistic approach in terms of the assessment and put it in the chat, and we could look at checking to see if we could add that.
So you're thinking Shanaz under standard 5.
I think I had, yep, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. It's good
Oh,
actually.
it's
that we
okay.
have-
Yeah, go ahead.
I
Yeah.
meant it to be under standard 5. I actually think I've drafted it for part B, but we can talk about that. I very much apologize.
No, that's okay.
And
There was
I
a
would
lot.
change my poll vote on this to a 5.
Okay, so we got it's really helpful to have that clarification, but we'll definitely address that. I want to make sure, Kristen, I'm guessing you have a clarification about what you want reflected in the notes. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I'm just gonna move your notes actually down to standard 5 and then just hope this conversation manifests again. I did want to make a note that we do use the term asset-based, like we use that phrase in other standards. And so just making a note of that. And then also if we want to add a set of definitions, that's not out of the question either. So that's an option as well, just for this group's knowledge.
And we don't need to add those definitions at this moment. That is, Kristen is referring to as these move forward to TSPCs.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. There was another person I think that had signaled in the vote that they may have had some questions. So I just want to create space if there's any other comments specifically. We're on standard 4, which for clarity, there's a lot of numbers here. What are we talking about? We're talking about assessment and database decision making, which is standard 4. Any other comments on that particular issue? Okay. So let me ask you this. Let's move to screen sharing standard 5, which is supporting multilingual learners. We haven't yet voted on this one. Do we want to discuss this anymore?
I'm feeling like maybe we need to have a draft of something before we can vote on it. If including that is going to be part of standard 5, we probably should have some sort of statement or an understanding by the council that that statement will be included.
Do we have specific, Shanaz, is that what you're working on right now?
Rhonda put it in the chat to everyone the way that I had drafted it.
Okay. How to use an assets-based analysis of multilingual students when using data from multiple languages to inform instruction.
And I do remember that I had been thinking of this specifically under students with reading difficulties. It's really
Under
part of MTSS.
5B. Okay.
I mean, it does pertain to multilinguals also. It could be in either section A or B, I think.
For me, again, if this is to look across a system with this lens, so for me, it falls under MTSS.
So Julie, are you saying in the last section under standard 4? Yeah.
I think it's most appropriate there, again, because we're looking at MTSS is really a systemic look across, all intensive instruction.
Can we
So
scroll back to see MTSS?
I think it's up above still, right?
So maybe under 4B, database decision making to inform instructional intensity.
It's a good
Yeah.
place for it.
Yeah,
That
That
makes a lot of sense to me. I like that a lot.
So for clarity, are we suggesting here that under standard 4B, which is related to assessments and database decision making, we would add a,
I don't think it's on the screen where,
Right here.
isn't it? Wouldn't it be a, would it be a new Roman numeral?
I see.
4?
No, it would be underneath that.
yeah, 4.
No, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
So we're adding a new Roman numeral under B, under 3. So when it goes, how to provide all students with instruction, if you can highlight, Kristen, I think, whoever's screen sharing, under that, how to provide all students with instruction that is needs-based, we would also say how to use an assets-based analysis of multilingual students when using data from multiple languages to inform instruction.
Perfect.
And do
And-
we like the term asset space then?
Or in parentheses, holistic.
Yeah, maybe both and then define them
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, I mean, holistic, yeah, parentheses won't work for rules, but you all don't need to worry about that, but it just for the purposes of clarity,
Okay.
that can be kind of worked out in terms of what TSPC can offer. Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but that could be part of it so that we have clarity.
Or in the chat, yeah, holistic assets-based analysis.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you.
I think the challenge here is when you hear assets based, you're thinking about things that will be helpful. But then if you have children who come in with very little English language or in their first language, no reading, no vocabulary, and it's really a holistic view because they're bringing very little assets to it. And so that's why I preferred the term holistic, because you're just looking at, do they have deficits? Do they have, or do they have brilliance in many languages?
Well, and what I always want to emphasize is they may have a little language in 1 and 2, but it's the totality of that language. That's that holistic perspective. And
Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, great. So we're gonna add that for B4, Roman numeral, and any other discussion on this before we vote on that? So the vote that you're gonna see, the poll, is gonna be for standard 5 multilingual, but it is with the assumption that we're adding this point that we just talked about with a new B. Co-chair Fritz, were you gonna add something?
Well, I was just wondering if we needed to re-vote on standard 4 because we added that into standard 4, which we already voted.
Oh, right. Yep, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do. Can I do that again? I think I can. Relaunch. Yes, continue. Okay, so this is standard 4. Did this vote already? We're doing it again, just to add that 4B. Any last folks? Okay. I think we're gonna end the poll, share results. Everybody is either a 4 or 5 on this one now. So I'll stop sharing. And then we're gonna move to standard 5, which is supporting multilingual learners. We could, we've already got that scrolled up. Great. So go ahead and vote on that one. I think a couple folks might have gone from their computers because the number, oh, there we go. Okay. And poll, share results. Here we go. Everybody is a 5 or a 4. Stop sharing. And Co-Chair Fritz, I think we're going to the last one, right?
Yes, so the last one is on the field experiences standards, with the understanding that we would change the wording to what Sarah suggested, make it not an option.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So when the field experiences, candidates have to do a certain amount of hours of field experiences. That is required, correct?
Correct.
But in the past, literacy, specific to literacy, was not required.
No,
Okay.
except in the reading intervention endorsement program.
Okay, so this would be that any candidate who's getting just the general subjects license would have to do something in literacy.
Correct.
Right, okay. Do we anticipate like a lot of questions about that in terms of placement? I mean, is this getting candidates placed? Does it change? Like if they're, say, I guess just back, will it be difficult to place candidates in a certain amount of hours, or is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think just to address kind of what we did here is we, instead of just a general elementary placement, our candidates go and do like a specific reading placement. So they're teaching foundational skills specifically. So we just replaced something that was other general hours to something more like reading. I'm not gonna,
Okay.
it's going to be, it's not easy. It's not an easy fix, but a lot of different people in a lot of different states have implemented something similar.
Okay.
So I think it's doable, but we may get some pushback.
And then does it, and we're not really clarifying it out, it's just practicing and observing. So it could just be small group. So they don't necessarily have to be in a classroom. It could be, my placement is working, with a reading intervention teacher in a small group. It doesn't have to be teaching like the whole group, correct?
Correct.
Because it's just some field experience.
Yes, so
Okay.
yeah, it could definitely be small group. In fact, I think Julie, she must be off now. Julie Reagan asked about that in particular, if we would want that to make it so they had to work with a reading interventionist or specialist, which I think leaving it a little more open-ended might give us more options.
Okay, sounds good.
I do have a question about evidence-based instructional materials, which is critical, but how does that then, what about state-approved materials? So what if, there's evidence on a program that is not adopted by Oregon? How does that align?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a little bit of a tricky space because if you want to respond, because in Oregon, we're not a state that requires certain curricular programs are used. So if you want to use one that's not approved, you can write in for kind of an exemption. And so we don't, yes, but we don't as a state operate in a way that we can require districts to use certain programs.
I am noticing that there's some folks that haven't responded to the poll. So I'm just wanting to make sure, it seems like there's more discussion worth having here about like, what it would take is kind of what I'm understanding to make this happen. And I also recognize that the third part of the executive order from the governor for the June deadline is really an implementation plan and roadmap for how to, and what the resources and timing is needed to implement your recommendations. So I just wanted to surface that is part of the discussion as one of the phases of your work. But is there any more questions or discussion on this before we kind of complete the poll on this? Okay, I'm going to end the poll and then share results. Okay, so we've got 4s and 5s on this one as well. Okay, I think that is all the different sections. Co-Chair Fritz, is that right? We didn't miss anything?
I don't think so. I think we got it all.
Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you so much for your attention to this and the time and energy you put in reviewing and your good questions. I hope you all feel comfortable with what we've come up with, because it feels like we're in a good place. We've put things in that needed to be in there, and I think that an appropriate level of specificity. Julie.
So I had a very small part of helping on the subcommittee, but I really want to acknowledge the work of Rhonda, Anita, and Katie in putting these together. It was a tremendous push and they did an excellent job. So thank you, thank you, thank you for this excellent work.
Thank you, Julie.
All right. Can you just verbalize what you've put in the chat so that we have for the public record what you are communicating?
Yes, absolutely. Just wanted to address and clarify kind of like the path districts can take to adopt instructional materials and what's required, particularly governed by Division 22. One is to adopt off the state board approved list. That's currently on a 7-year cycle. And the second is through independent adoption. Both of those processes require the use of the state board criteria for each content area. So I just wanted to clarify those paths. I think Dr. Danielson spoke to that a bit, and so just wanted to provide some information there.
Yet, I'll just add to that and thank you, that's so correct. And yet a local board, regardless of the outcomes on that state rubric, may choose to adopt the materials.
Okay. I know Director Cannon, you had wanted to just share a thought as well, so I'll create space for that as well.
Yeah, just it's sort of a question, and I may be the only one who has it. But the structure of these standards, these program standards, are primarily in terms of things that the candidate ought to know and be able to do. And I think because our agency conducts institutional reviews for different purposes, not in this space, and approves certain institutions, private career schools, some private degree granting institutions to operate in Oregon. And when we do, we review the institution's practices and resources and we review at the institutional level. And so I'm just sort of curious how standards that are apply to the institution, because again, these are standards that apply to the EPP, how they are assessed when they're expressed in terms of what candidates should know and be able to do. Is there some threshold? Is there some evidence that candidates have to provide and some percentage of candidates that have to show that they know and are able to do these things in order for the school to receive TSPC approval? Or is there other forms of evidence that the school, that the EPP has to provide in order to receive TSPC approval? I'm just struck with, it's just sort of an assessment, but like, how are these standards applied when they're expressed in terms of the candidate, but they actually are, it's the institution that's the focus of the accountability here, right? Not I think the point is not to hold the candidates accountable, it's to hold the institution. So that's what I've just been wondering about.
I think Rep Wright has expressed that from the very beginning. How are we going to put teeth behind it? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Pooja, but I feel like that is kind of the next step when we start talking about licensure. Is maybe that's a licensure requirement will give us some accountability for EPPs. So for instance, it could be an assessment that they that is directly related to these standards. Or it could be some other measure, but I think that might be more of a next step sort of thing in terms of how we put some teeth behind it, but also would love to hear other ideas on how we can hold EPPs accountable and not make it necessarily just the candidates.
Yeah, Dr. Archer, why don't you share first? And then I also want to create space for Melissa to share too as interim director of TSPC, if you'd like, Melissa. Go ahead first, Dr. Archer. You're on mute.
Many states have already done this, and in terms of these are the skills that the instructors have to teach to a high level of mastery to the teachers so that they can use them with students. And so as I reviewed what states were doing to look at the institutions of higher education, they visited the schools and they looked at the rubrics. What are you doing in phonemic awareness? What are you doing vocabulary? Who is covering data and assessment? And then they utilized the syllabus reviews as a part of that. And they coupled it with tests that the people would have to take who were wanting to be licensed to pass that had questions that would get to the knowledge base. So it was a combination of we're going to hold you accountable, and here's the kind of evidence that you could use to show that you are doing this. And Rhonda, you're already very much involved in this at your, if we came to your campus, which Representative Wright did, how would you, what kind of evidence would you utilize to show these areas?
Well, I think you spoke to that in terms of syllabi, amount of time spent addressing each of the different areas. You know, what kinds of practical experiences did our candidates get that you would see them getting those field experiences. So yeah, I think there are multiple different ways. It might be even like common assignments that students do that demonstrate that they have an understanding of the different components. So those kinds of things I think would be evidence, but I'll let Melissa talk about this too.
Thank you. Go ahead, Melissa.
Thanks, Dr. Fritz. I'd agree with what has already been said, and just add that I think this is something that will need to be covered more deeply in the implementation phase of the council's work. It is really important that who we're talking about right now are those who are trained and taught in Oregon. And so in order for us to assess then whether folks coming from out of state colleges and universities have the expertise that we're expecting within early literacy, we need to be able to define what those actual expectations are for what looks different in Oregon EPPs as juxtaposed with other states. And as Dr. Archer can lead us to, other states who are probably ahead of us on this to help us identify how we are going to measure with the things that Dr. Fritz and Dr. Archer mentioned. It is going to be essential for our licensing part of our agency as we're considering licenses built upon the completion of educator prep programs from other states.
Director Cannon, does that kind of respond to some of your questions?
Yeah, it's really helpful. I'll save further kind of thoughts about this for offline, but yes, thank you. That's been really helpful.
One of the, I'm just going to screen share. This is part of the pre-reading packet from October 18th, in which we kind of shared what the current literacy standards are. And so, for example, the reading instruction and dyslexia and other reading disabilities that the subcommittee looked at, in addition to everything else that they talked about, the beginning portion of it seems that's kind of pretty critical, right? The Oregon EPPs, educator preparation programs, must provide the necessary program components that will enable candidates to ... And what I see demonstrated, do you also, now it's pause screen sharing. Let me try this once more. I'm just noticing part of the beginning portion of the subcommittee's work is around the purpose, where it says, they're talking about the intent. Oh, this is not great to highlight, but it's similarly, here we go. It's in the scope. The requirements for instruction of these new literacy standards apply to Oregon EPPs preparing candidates to. So I just want to ask for the subcommittee, the intention is actually that all of what you've put forward is actually what Oregon EPPs, educator preparation programs, need to do to enable candidates to do all of these things that we talked about. Is that correct?
Yes. That is.
Okay. And is it also correct, Melissa, that the licensing standards that's in the next phase of the deadlines for us is really about what individual educators need to be able to do for licensing? So there's a both and for EPPs, what they're doing and what TSPC is going to review, that this, what we talked about today, is related to, and then this would be translated for licensing standards in the next phase, correct? Oh, now you've gone mute, even though you were not on mute. So now we've completely, but we can read. I think the intention is that you said yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, wonderful. Well, I super appreciate everybody's kind of talking through, digesting a lot of really great work here for us today. In terms of next steps, here's what I am curious about. So we had intended to put together, last month, we had a document like this that was kind of ready to go. So I wanted to know whether or not your intention of the council is to put what we just talked about into a format like this, so that the public and the EPPs have a little bit more context, that provides the introduction, tells us what the literacy framework, why it's important. And then essentially all of this would be replaced by what we talked about today and voted on. Is that your intention? I see Co-Chair Fritz, your head is nodding as well.
Yes, that was exactly what I was considering happening next, is that we'll have that format and that will go out to EPPs and to public comment, so that then we can refine further if needed.
Okay, great. And then since we were able to capture several tweaks and revisions based on our discussion today, Co-Chair Fritz, would it be helpful for staff to kind of do those revisions based on our discussion and send it back to you and Co-Chair Gardner for review before we send it out to EPPs in public?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay, great. And then in terms of next, so we will probably be able to do that within the next couple of days. And then we will send out both a letter we will send out a letter from us to educator preparation program leaders to invite them to review and provide feedback on the draft packet that we'll send out, as well as to the public at large. And then they'll have about a month to review that. What I want to flag for you all is we don't have an official council business meeting in the month of February. We only have 2 informational optional work groups. And the reason for that is because it is legislative session starting in early February, and we were having quorum issues. So we can't really make decisions during the month of February due to lack of quorum because of legislative session. So what we can do is to allow for one of those work group times to be reserved for maybe the subcommittee and anybody else who wants to join to kind of review the public input and to make sense of it, so that when we have our March business meeting, that you all can be prepared to kind of say how you want to move forward with reconciling any of the input that you get. Does that process make sense? Do you have any questions? Go ahead, Dr. Archer.
My question is, how do you make it available to the public so that that people who are involved in literacy across the state of Oregon would have total access to give feedback? I can understand it going to the EPPs, that's great, but how is it going to be made accessible? And the recording of our discussion, I presume that's going to be available too.
Yes, great questions. So there's many different ways that we can use, and I'll ask my agency partners to chime in here too. So we have a website that we always post our meeting materials that is at the governor's office website. And Alex, if you could put that in the chat, just so people are reminded of that. And we also have a YouTube channel link. So like this is live streamed and put right on the YouTube channel live. Others are able to access that at any time. And so the recommendations, once you're finally ready to say, public, we want your input, and then EPP separately, we'll do an outreach specifically to a listserv that TSPC has related to educator preparation program leaders, deans, as well as faculty. So that's one angle. But in terms of your question about the public at large, we would post it on the website. And I think ODE team, TSPC teams, we have listservs that you can send it out to. Like, for example, the many people who provided input on the Oregon Early Literacy Framework may be very interested in these recommendations. So between our agencies, we can send out the invitation to respond. Anybody? I see head nods from my agency leaders. Go ahead, Dr. Archer.
Pooja, what would really be helpful, because many of us get private requests, I want to respond, I would like to respond. Could you send some notification that we could have on our computers that when they said that we could send it right to them? Because it's people, teachers, school district leaders. I mean, I get a whole group of them, and I just would love something that says, well, here's the website to get more information. Here's the YouTube. That would be really cool.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely totally doable. I'm hearing an invitation of, if you all will have your networks of folks you want to get input on, we'll give you a blurb that you can send out that information to point people in the right place.
We'll look forward to the blurb. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I saw a hand. Who did I just see? Was it you, Co-Chair Fritz? I don't think you raised. Oh, Melissa. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, yes, we do. I just want to reassure you, we have outreach to all of the administrators, outreach to all of the teachers. So both through the Department of Education and through TSPC and through our partners who will reach other people that we may not reach. The one thing I would recommend based on your comment is that, and based on my having the YouTube recording from your last meeting in order to feel ready to meet with you all for all the work you've done to date in this meeting, I did notice there aren't very many YouTube views. And so I don't think that it's a very public place where it's not very prominently placed or well known yet. So when we communicate out, having a link to the governor's website where all that information can be found will be a great addition.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah, there's not, yeah, we can get any ideas to just continue to get the word out or welcome. Okay. Co-chair, oh, go ahead, Jennifer, saw you unmute.
I was just going to say maybe targeting the recent graduates, the past 1 to 2 years of EPPs, to have input from them as a comparative of, you just graduated and now you're in class, I don't know if the EPPs would do that. I think I can see the new teachers that I have wanting to kind of do some comparison.
Is that a list that HEC would have?
Do we have that? Would EPPs have that? Or I guess
TSPC has that list. Like we can pull a list of those individuals.
Okay. It's a great suggestion. All right. Any final thoughts? Okay. Our next steps, I think we're set in terms of the outreach that folks have flagged. And Co-Chair Fritz, any last words from you to close the meeting today?
Yes, thank you so much for all you are all doing for Oregon's kids. This is amazing. Thank you.
All right, and special shout out to you, Co-Chair Fritz, and thank you all. Just want to reiterate deep appreciation. This is really, really critical work, and I know the governor's very excited by it. Between this and the early literacy school grants, where we have every single school district in our state is all in to get these resources and to align their literacy instruction to the literacy framework, and then what you all are doing on the upstream pipeline, we're really at a really important inflection point and what we can do to raise our outcomes on literacy because in part many of your expertise. So thank you for the work that you do every single day.